The flight from Madrid to Amman was unlike any Ronaldo had taken before, not because of the destination or the aircraft, but because of the complete secrecy surrounding the journey and the profound uncertainty about what he would find when he reached his final destination. He had told no one about this trip except his most trusted assistant, who had arranged the logistics with the kind of discretion usually reserved for state secrets. There would be no media coverage, no photo opportunities, no carefully orchestrated charitable appearances designed to enhance his public image. This was something else entirely, a personal pilgrimage driven by a need to see with his own eyes the reality behind the images that had been haunting him for months. The decision to visit a Palestinian refugee camp had been building in Ronaldo's mind ever since his public statements about the conflict had thrust him into a global conversation about human rights and moral responsibility. While his words had resonated with millions of people around the world, they had also attracted criticism from those who believed athletes should stay out of political discussions. But for Ronaldo, this had never been about politics in the traditional sense. It had been about children, about families, about human beings caught in circumstances beyond their control, and about his growing conviction that speaking out wasn't enough if it wasn't accompanied by direct engagement and understanding. The refugee camp he would visit was located in Jordan, one of several facilities that housed Palestinians who had been displaced from their homes over the decades of conflict. The camp had started as a temporary settlement in the 1960s, but had gradually evolved into a permanent community housing over 50,000 people across multiple generations. What had been intended as a short-term solution to a political crisis had become a multi-generational way of life, with children being born and raised in conditions that their grandparents had never imagined would become permanent. Ronaldo's contact for the visit was Dr. Amina Hassan, a Palestinian Jordanian physician who had spent her career providing medical care in refugee settlements throughout the region. Dr. Hassan had reached out to Ronaldo through intermediaries after his public statements, not to ask for money or publicity, but to invite him to see firsthand the reality of refugee life. Her message had been simple and direct. If you truly want to understand what you're speaking about, come and see for yourself. No cameras, no media, just the truth. The invitation had arrived at a time when Ronaldo was struggling with the gap between his comfortable life and the suffering he had witnessed through news reports and social media. He had made donations, spoken publicly about the need for humanitarian assistance, and used his platform to raise awareness about refugee issues. But increasingly, he felt that these actions, while well-intentioned, were insufficient responses to the magnitude of human suffering he was trying to address. He needed to understand more deeply, to see more clearly, and to engage more directly with the reality he was attempting to influence. Dr. Hassan met Ronaldo at Queen Alia International Airport in Amman, her presence immediately commanding respect despite her small stature and quiet demeanor. She was a woman in her 50s, whose eyes carried the weight of decades spent treating patients in some of the world's most challenging conditions, but whose spirit remained undimmed by the hardships she had witnessed. During the drive from the airport to the refugee camp, she briefed Ronaldo on what he would see and experience, preparing him for realities that no amount of media coverage could adequately convey. The people you'll meet today have been living in this camp for decades, Dr. Hassan explained as they drove through the Jordanian countryside. Some of them were born here and have never seen the villages their grandparents describe. Others arrived recently, having fled new conflicts and violence. What they all share is a sense of displacement, of being suspended between a past they can't return to and a future they can't quite envision. But they also share something else, an incredible resilience and dignity that has allowed them to build meaningful lives despite circumstances that would break many people. As they approached the camp, Ronaldo was struck by its size and permanence. This wasn't the collection of temporary tents he had imagined, but a sprawling community of concrete buildings, narrow streets, small shops, schools, and clinics that looked like a small city. Clotheslines stretched between buildings, children played soccer in dusty courtyards, and the sounds of daily life, conversations, laughter, music, and the calls to prayer created an atmosphere that was both familiar and foreign to someone accustomed to very different living conditions. Dr. Hassan led Ronaldo through the camp's main thoroughfare, introducing him to shopkeepers, teachers, and community leaders who had built lives and livelihoods within the constraints of refugee status. What struck him immediately was the normalcy of much of what he observed. Families going about their daily routines, students walking to school with backpacks and homework, elderly men playing backgammon outside cafes, women shopping for vegetables at small markets. The camp wasn't just a place where people survived. It was a place where they lived, loved, worked, and raised families with the same hopes and concerns as people everywhere. But underneath this surface normalcy, Ronaldo began to perceive the deeper realities of refugee life. The schools were overcrowded and under-resourced, with classes of 50 or 60 students sharing worn textbooks and writing on broken desks. The medical clinic where Dr. Hassan worked was clean and well-organized, but desperately short of supplies, equipment, and space to treat the camp's population. The housing, while permanent, was cramped and basic, with large families sharing small spaces that offered little privacy or comfort. Most significantly, there was a pervasive sense of uncertainty about the future, a recognition that despite the permanence of their current situation, their status as refugees meant that their lives remained fundamentally unsettled. Dr. Hassan's first stop was the camp's school, where she introduced Ronaldo to the principal, a Palestinian woman named Fatima, who had been educating refugee children for over 20 years. Fatima welcomed Ronaldo with warmth, but without the deference he usually encountered, treating him as an interested visitor rather than a celebrity. She led him through classrooms where children who had never lived anywhere but the refugee camp were learning Arabic, mathematics, science, and languages with an intensity that reflected their understanding that education was their primary path to a different future. In one classroom, Ronaldo observed a group of teenagers studying for university entrance exams, their notebooks filled with careful handwriting, and their faces showing the concentration of students who understood that their academic performance could determine whether they would spend their lives in the camp or find opportunities beyond its boundaries. The teacher, a young man who had himself grown up in the camp before earning a university degree, spoke passionately about his students' potential and their dreams of becoming doctors, engineers, teachers, and artists. These children are as talented and capable as any students anywhere in the world, the teacher explained to Ronaldo. What they lack is not ability or motivation, but opportunity. They study in overcrowded classrooms with outdated books, but they dream of changing the world. My job is to help them believe that their dreams are possible despite their circumstances. Ronaldo spent time talking with the students, asking about their studies, their interests, and their hopes for the future. What emerged from these conversations was a picture of young people who possessed remarkable maturity and determination, shaped by their understanding of the challenges they faced, but not defeated by them. One 17-year-old girl, named Layla, spoke about her ambition to become a pediatric surgeon, inspired by Dr. Hassan's work in the camp clinic. Another student, a boy named Omar, described his plans to study computer science and develop technology that could help refugee communities around the world. Their dreams were specific, ambitious, and grounded in a desire not just to escape their current circumstances, but to use their eventual success to help others facing similar challenges. The next stop was Dr. Hassan's clinic, where Ronaldo observed the daily reality of providing medical care in a resource-constrained environment. The clinic was spotlessly clean and efficiently organized, but it was also clearly inadequate for the size of the population it served. Patients waited for hours to see one of the 3 doctors who staffed the facility, and many medical needs went unmet simply because the clinic lacked the equipment, medications, or specialized expertise required to address them. Dr. Hassan showed Ronaldo through the various departments of the clinic, explaining how they managed to provide quality care despite the limitations they faced. In the pediatric section, he met children being treated for conditions that could have been easily prevented or addressed with better living conditions and more comprehensive medical resources. In the maternal health area, He learned about women giving birth without access to the kind of prenatal care and delivery facilities that were taken for granted in wealthier countries. Throughout the clinic, he saw medical staff who were clearly dedicated and skilled, but who were constantly forced to make difficult decisions about how to allocate limited resources among unlimited needs. What moved Ronaldo most deeply was not the medical needs themselves, but the grace and dignity with which patients and medical staff navigated these challenges. Parents waiting with sick children showed patience and gratitude rather than frustration or anger. Medical staff worked with a combination of professionalism and compassion that reflected their understanding that they were providing not just medical care, but hope and human connection to people whose lives had been marked by displacement and uncertainty. Dr. Hassan herself embodied this combination of clinical excellence and human warmth, treating each patient as an individual with specific needs and concerns, rather than as a case to be processed efficiently. In the afternoon, Ronaldo visited the homes of several refugee families, experiences that provided him with intimate insights into the daily realities of camp life. The first family he met included 3 generations living in a 2-room concrete apartment: grandparents who had fled their village in 1967, their adult children who had been born in the camp, and grandchildren who represented the 3rd generation of refugees. The grandmother, a woman named Mohammed, welcomed Ronaldo with traditional hospitality, insisting on serving tea and sweets despite the obvious limitations of her circumstances. As they sat together in the small living room that also served as bedroom and dining room for multiple family members, Mohammed told the story of her family's displacement and adaptation with a combination of sadness and remarkable resilience. She described the village she had left as a young woman, with its olive groves and stone houses, and extended family networks that had provided security and identity for generations. But she also spoke about the life her family had built in the camp, the friendships they had formed, the community they had helped create, and the ways they had maintained their culture and values despite the challenges of refugee life. Her son, who worked as a mechanic in the camp's small commercial district, talked about his efforts to provide for his family while maintaining hope for a better future. His children, teenagers who attended the camp school, spoke about their studies and their dreams with the same mixture of determination and uncertainty that Ronaldo had observed throughout the camp. The second family Ronaldo visited included a young mother named Mariam, who was raising 3 small children while her husband worked in Amman to send money back to the camp. Mariam's story was more recent. She had fled to Jordan 5 years earlier with her infant daughter when violence in her hometown had made life impossible. Her experience of displacement was fresher and more traumatic than that of families who had been in the camp for generations, but she had found support and community among other refugees who understood her situation and had helped her rebuild her life in a new place. Mariam's apartment was even smaller than the first family's, but she had decorated it with photographs, children's artwork, and small objects that created a sense of home, despite the temporary nature of her situation. Her children, who had spent most of their lives in the camp, played with toys made from discarded materials and spoke about their school friends and neighborhood adventures with the enthusiasm of children everywhere. What struck Ronaldo about Mariam was her determination to create normalcy and stability for her children, despite the uncertainty and hardship of their circumstances. Throughout these home visits, Ronaldo was consistently impressed by the warmth and hospitality he encountered. Despite having very little in material terms, every family he met insisted on sharing what they had, whether it was food, tea, or simply conversation and stories. He was treated not as a celebrity or potential benefactor, but as a guest whose presence was genuinely welcomed and whose interest in their lives was appreciated. The conversations he had in these homes covered topics that ranged from the practical challenges of daily life to deeper questions about identity, belonging, and hope for the future. As the day progressed, Ronaldo found himself increasingly moved by the contrast between the dire circumstances he had expected to encounter and the remarkable humanity and dignity he actually witnessed. The refugee camp was certainly a place marked by hardship, limitation, and uncertainty. But it was also a place where people had created meaningful lives, strong communities, and sustaining relationships, despite circumstances that might have seemed insurmountable to an outside observer. The children he met were not defined by their refugee status, but by their personalities, interests, and dreams. The adults he encountered were not victims waiting for rescue, but active agents working to improve their circumstances and provide for their families. As the sun began to set and his visit drew to a close, Dr. Hassan took Ronaldo to a small hill overlooking the camp where they could see the full scope of the community spread out below them. From this vantage point, the camp looked like what it was, a small city with its own rhythms, relationships, and way of life. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played in courtyards and streets, and the sounds of evening activities drifted up from the buildings below. "What do you think?" Dr. Hassan asked simply, as they stood together watching the camp transition from day to evening. Ronaldo was quiet for a long moment, trying to process everything he had seen and experienced. "I thought I understood what it meant to be a refugee," he finally said. "I thought I understood what I was speaking about when I talked about displacement and humanitarian crisis. But I realize now that I didn't understand anything. I had images in my mind of people waiting to be rescued, of communities that were broken and desperate. What I found instead was people who have built lives and families and communities under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. I found dignity and strength and hope in places where I expected to find only suffering." Dr. Hassan nodded, recognizing the transformation that many visitors experienced when they moved beyond media images to direct engagement with refugee communities. "The people you met today don't need your pity," she said gently. "They need opportunity. They need the chance to use their talents and education and determination in places where those qualities can flourish. They need the world to recognize that being a refugee is a temporary status, not a permanent identity, and that given the opportunity, they can contribute tremendously to any society that welcomes them." As they drove back toward Amman that evening, Ronaldo reflected on how this day had changed his understanding not just of refugee life, but of his own responsibilities as someone with a global platform and significant resources. He had come to the camp thinking he might gain insights that would make his advocacy more effective, but he was leaving with a fundamental shift in how he understood the relationship between privilege and obligation, between speaking out and meaningful engagement, between charity and justice. The visit to the refugee camp became a turning point in Ronaldo's approach to humanitarian work. Instead of simply making donations or public statements, he began to develop long-term relationships with organizations working directly with refugee communities. He established scholarship programs specifically designed to help refugee students attend universities, started a foundation that provided medical equipment and training to clinics in refugee camps, and used his platform to advocate not just for humanitarian assistance, but for policies that would provide refugees with genuine opportunities for resettlement and integration. But perhaps most importantly, the visit changed how Ronaldo thought about his own life and success. The people he had met in the refugee camp had shown him that dignity, community, and hope could flourish even in the most challenging circumstances. And that lesson influenced how he approached his own challenges and opportunities. He began to speak more openly about the responsibility that came with privilege, the importance of using success to create opportunities for others, and the ways that engagement with suffering could lead not to despair, but to a deeper appreciation for the resilience and potential of human beings in all circumstances. Years later, when Ronaldo looked back on his career and tried to identify the experiences that had shaped him most profoundly, he would always mention his secret visit to the Palestinian refugee camp as a day that had taught him more about courage, dignity, and hope than any victory on a football field ever could.